really significant role in a lot of the folks that came up from the hip hop era around their political work. So
Right.
my question to you is how music contributed to forming your political
Oh
education.
wow. Wow. I thought you were gonna say, how do you know that?
I know I didn't see any
Yeah,
citations.
yeah,
What's
yeah,
up?
yeah.
I'm challenging. I'm countering. No,
Well, here
I
I
want to
am.
know your. Yeah.
Yeah, here I am trying to squeeze all of this into this small space. Hello everyone. It's great to be here. And to answer your question, what role did music play in shaping? Man, God, that's such a great question. I mean, music has always kind of been, present for me. I think most certainly growing up, I sang on the choir in the black church. I also played an instrument. I was a saxophone. I took saxophone lessons from, I want to say maybe second grade through high school. Outside of that, just kind of hearing music that was, that mostly my older brothers. We're talking about, Michael Eric Dyson is kind of an older brother to me. My brothers are his age, and so like the music they were listening to kind of filtered, and they hated hip hop. They were like, "This is not music. This is," because they knew the original songs that were being sampled. So they were like, this is just
Oh,
rehashed music. You know what I
wow.
mean? It's funny because you hear people, old heads in hip hop, say that now when they hear a song like a Nelly sample being used. Like, wait a minute, that's just Nelly. That's not original. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's interesting to see that. But yeah, I mean, I think there were those things. I think there was most certainly, the college years music that we listened to, the range, house music, and the emerging hip hop artists. But we were hungry for conscious hip hop, and so as it emerged, really along with us, I graduated from high school in 1984, and so by the time Rakim comes out 2 years later, I mean, we had already been listening to hip hop. We were listening to hip hop before it was on records. I had one of my cousins lived two doors down from me who was a DJ, and he would set up his DJ equipment, and I would go over there and try to spin records and stuff. And so like we were immersed in music. Some of the early music that we were listening to that I can remember were things that hip hop artists sampled. There's a part of Rakim's book which I, co-wrote with him, his collaborating writer for Sweat the Technique. He's talking about one of his samples, over like a fat rat. I can't remember the artist right now. And so, but that was like that was actually the first song I tried to mix. And so he's telling this story about how they were able to use this sample. So I mean, like, the music is just kind of always, it's always present. And I think growing up in the church and hearing people sing that can really sing, you start to get a kind of a barometer for what's good music. And I think that was kind of a lot of the early orientation.
That timeline is so interesting because you do open up the essay talking about that you were eligible to vote in 1984. And then you didn't until you really saw the full swing of the Jesse Jackson campaign, the second run in
Yeah,
1988.
yeah,
But then, as you said, those interim years, you had this relationship to hip hop when it was also underground. It was still the thing for Black youth, right? It hadn't
right.
made it above ground. And I didn't even think about the power that such a music not being mainstream had around political organizing for Black youth at
Yeah,
that time. So if you could
yeah.
speak about that convergence, you have the
Hmm.
Jesse Jackson, the rise of this hip hop movement, especially the political consciousness movement that, of course, I like grew up after that period. So
Right, right,
I heard the sampling in those songs and I was like,
right.
wow, that's amazing. But I didn't grow up with that.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting, and it was stunning. It was stunning to hear Malcolm X like that. You know what I mean? To hear those samples, to hear James Brown like that. You know what I mean? Like, for many of us, that was our introduction to some of that music, and that was the brilliance of hip hop. It was reaching back to a previous generation and bringing that music forward. A lot of the music we knew and we heard and we danced to. So then hearing it being rapped over wasn't really that far-fetched, because that was kind of what people were doing in the parks and stuff anyway. But in terms of the music was also very much a it was, you know, people often, hip hop gets criticized for being male centric, but at that time it was something about it that was magical, because you didn't really have young, there was no space, no, there was no voice for young Black men. And I think that if you really start to delve into some of the origins of hip hop, you know, Akua Naru started this archiving project called The Keepers, where she's documenting early women MCs in hip hop. There's so many, and I think it's probably more than it is now. And I think that, you know, yeah, I think that people got to dig a little bit deeper in them crates, because they're missing some of this story. Well, there were a lot of women MCs, and when Akua started doing this work, and she would come up to me, she'd be like, "Do you remember so and so? Do you remember so and so? Do you remember so and so?" And it's like, man, yeah, I guess I kind of do remember that. So it kind of was a period where there were women really present, and then it kind of, you know, fell off. So but definitely, you know, to see ourselves as young people, and to hear young people have voice, that was such an important thing, and we really were protective of that. But in terms of Minister Farrakhan and Jesse Jackson, and whether or not we were participating, I mean, like, we were, you know, really, you know, we really held Malcolm X in high esteem. And Jesse Jackson was like the opposite of that for us. So it was hard for us to really kind of wrap our head around.
Wait. Why was he the opposite?
Well, because Jesse Jackson was the protege of Martin Luther King. And at that point, in terms of the Martin Luther King narrative, the mainstream had really latched on to, you know, the soft Dr. King. And that was the message that was being pushed. And that was the way that people were interpreting it. There was still this real strong dichotomy between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. I think that's one of the great things about Peniel Joseph's work, is he really kind of begins to kind of tear that down in a really special way. But it was interesting for me to read him now. This is like 30 years or so later, you know what I mean? Like, and so, yeah, I think that Farrakhan's emergence was so, you know, much in that tradition of Malcolm X. And I think that is what we were looking for. I mean, we started to think about that, even hip hop as a musical form, you know, and to think about it, I mean, the idea of young men kind of being in their warrior years, you know, that's a real thing. And so, like, when we heard the beat of hip hop, it was a much different thing than, say, you know, the disco or the stuff that Lionel Richie started singing after he left the Commodores. You know what I mean? It was a more kind of watered down Blackness. But hip hop was a much more rugged and kind of in your face. And as young men, we really kind of gravitated and connected with it. So that was a big thing. And then again, I felt like the Jackson campaign, I just think we didn't know the intricacies of the history yet. You know what I mean? We were 18, you know, and we were 18, we were 17, and we were like, you know, our parents had talked about, you know, the civil rights movement to us when we were growing up. And really, mostly what they talked about was the people who were getting lynched and stuff, and how that made them leave the South. I grew up in Long Island. My parents moved to Long Island in 1955 after Emmett Till was killed. You know what I'm saying? So like that was a real thing in our childhood. And so the idea of marching even was just like something like we're never going to do that. I mean, that was a thing. Like, you know, we wanted something more radical. And I think that Farrakhan spoke to that sense of radicalism. I think it's actually been one of the brilliant things about the Nation of Islam that people don't really understand. Why it connects with young people, I think, is that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's such an interesting moment, because the nation was taken into a different direction by one of the sons of Elijah Muhammad to
Right.
more of a Sunni practice, and converted everybody. And then Farrakhan is waiting in the wings. And he also has a musical background. That's another
right.
thing.
That's right.
Most people don't know. He's a very accomplished musician.
Right.
And you can go look at his violin virtuoso
That's right.
performances.
Yeah.
but and then as you were writing in this piece, so he starts to rise. But the other thing I never started to figure out, which kind of relates to this discussion you're having about the skepticism around Jesse Jackson, there is like this embrace of Malcolm X. He gets revived by the hip hop community, and especially Chuck D and Public Enemy. How did they square the Farrakhan narrative, or was that ever
Yeah.
really?
I mean, I think that there was such a skepticism around the government
Okay.
until people just, I mean, just much like now, this people are like, oh, I don't want to take the vaccine
Right.
because of the Tuskegee syphilis experience. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like that was and I think that that's very real with among younger people more so than older people. And I think that that was the same. There was a skepticism around whether or not the Nation of Islam had anything to do with Malcolm X's death, or was it just the government doing what the government had been doing? Whether you're talking about Fred Hampton, which this film is out now,
Yeah.
or countless others. I mean, the track record is so severe until it was just hard to just outright just dismiss.
But then Farrakhan, uncharacteristic of the nation, starts to align with Jesse Jackson.
Yeah, yeah.
Could you
Yeah,
speak on that?
that was
That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. It was an interesting thing. I mean, I think it kind of took us by surprise and actually kind of pulled us more into paying attention to what was happening with electoral politics. I mean, I think that you had Farrakhan and Jesse kind of joining, working. He was trying to help him to get elected, basically, and helping the campaign. And it was just a powerful moment. It was a powerful moment of unity. It was a powerful moment of a intergenerational discourse, but also it kind of took us deeper into the history, and it made us start thinking about what were the possibilities. I think one of the difficult things growing up immediately after the civil rights and the Black Power movements is those movements were so huge and transformative and defining that it was hard for us to imagine a Blackness that wasn't that. You know what I mean? Or politics that wasn't that. And so I think that Farrakhan and Jesse Jackson kind of joining in this way, that was like something new. It was a new way that you could start to think about how could you be politically engaged. So that was very impactful for a lot of people. And a lot of people voted for the first time. A lot of people got involved in elections for the first time, and we just really kind of started to pay attention in a different way and started to see that Jesse Jackson was amazing. and his oratory was amazing, and it was nothing like it in America. You know what I mean? And to talk about unifying people and to begin to think about the ways in which Blackness and Black culture and even the sense of Black self-determination and the history of Black liberation was so intimately connected and bound to the ideas of democracy. That was a really powerful thing. And to start to think about democracy and to start to think about the ways in which Black people had helped to shape the democracy, and to start to archive it within your own family, and to find that you had relatives that fought in these world wars, and et cetera. This began to kind of change our orientation, and we began to think about hip hop and politics in a different way.
Well, let's go to one of those predecessor moments you talk about in your piece that also has an influence on the way politics are experienced and enacted in this 80s, 90s period. You talk about the 1972 Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana, that also was part of a spark, a movement around Black elected officials, the largest wave since Reconstruction happened. What significance does this moment have to the 80s and 90s and how politics is oriented for Black youth?
I mean, I think it's a huge impact. As you're talking about the Gary Convention, I'm thinking though about even just the ways in which we thought about Blackness. It was still, you got to keep in mind that the FBI COINTELPRO movement was so profound and penetrating that a lot of young people were afraid to be involved in politics because the message was, if you're too political, you're going to be killed for your ideas. You know what I mean? So I think that was a real thing. And I think that the electoral politics alternative provided a way for people to start to get into politics without having that same fear. Um, but I think that your question about the Gary, Indiana convention, I mean, a lot of this stuff, we were reading Malcolm X, we were reading Man Child in the Promised Land, and we were reading texts like, 84 was Alice Walker's book. We were reading Toni Morrison. So we were reading and learning about some of this history that way. But our generation of students, a lot of this stuff, we were learning this history, we were learning for the first time as college students. And so the whole history of the college, the Black students on college campus movement, which is documented by books like Martha Bionde's book, and one of Ibram's first books that people don't talk about. He wrote a book about the history of Black student movements on college campuses. This history, some of this history wasn't documented in the same way as it is now. So it wasn't at our fingertips. So we started to learn this stuff as college students, including things like the Gary, Indiana Black Political Convention of 72. And as we learned this history and it helped us to start to imagine what we could do. And so I was a part of a group of young people in 2003 that had grown up in our formative years, came into politics being aware of this, and also being aware of the history of conventions in the Black movements over the generations. And we felt we had a calling to do something like this. And so that's why we did the National Hip Hop Political Convention. And also we had this consciousness of Gary, kind of setting up this, wave of Black elected officials, and really kind of offering a different type of promise of an engagement that the country hadn't seen for Black folks since the era of Reconstruction. Of course, there's been a lot of critique of what came out of that, but still, I think it was valuable.
But I think your point is taken that the terror campaign after Reconstruction, like with lynching, with Jim Crow, with red light, with every kind of iteration, and then of course then COINTELPRO, and then last night I was just watching the Baldwin documentary again, and he's trying to think about how to connect the murders, the assassinations of Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X in his psyche to understand America. That sadly makes sense, how such a nation that considers itself a democracy for that period of time was leading such a successful terror campaign.
Yeah. It's pretty stunning to think about it, and it was very effective. And I think that that was one of the powerful things about the civil rights movement, was bringing this level of terror into international consciousness. Because prior to that, the United States was able to position itself as a leader of democracy, and then you start to get pushback from some of their rivals. We're like, well, wait a minute, you guys are terrorizing these Black people.
Well, I mean, even Jesse Jackson then becomes effective for the U.S. in getting hostages that they couldn't get out because you have a Black American face that's trusted in the global South.
That's right. Yeah, that was a fascinating moment, and really kind of, it's interesting when I saw the reaction of people in Ferguson, a new generation of activists, to folks like Jesse Jackson. It's just a stunning thing to see when you kind of grow and you evolve and you're seeing this history, and then you're starting to see what's coming, forward, and there's a disconnect.
Well, can you explain that for folks on this call that might not know what you're talking about?
So there was a period in which when the Ferguson explosion happened, after the murder of Mike Brown, you had, civil rights, old school folks coming to Ferguson to support, and really kind of bumping heads with the grassroots activists who didn't want them there and felt like they were coming to kind of steal steal the spotlight. And I think that, you know, it's interesting to see that when you know the history of these people, even the way that I feel like Al Sharpton often gets kind of dismissed. You know, Al Sharpton did major work. You know what I mean? So I think that it's interesting. And again, back to Dr. King, one of the things that Dr. King did, and which I think some of these old heads can learn from, is he surrounded himself with young people. He
Yeah.
spent a lot of time with young people. One of the great things about Pennell Joseph's book on Stokely Carmichael is he talks about the relationship between Stokely Carmichael and Martin Luther King, and how he challenged Dr. King and pushed back on Dr. King, and Dr. King kept coming back for more. So that he saw that as one of his assets, was his ability to engage young people. So I think all of it is really relevant for some of the movements that are happening now.
Let's get back to the 80s for a second before we jump to the 90s and the
Okay.
present. I'm really interested in your analysis around the role that hip hop plays in an era of Reagan and Reaganomics, and the way it offers a political critique
Yeah.
to a voice. You know, we forget the times that there were only 3 channels and maybe a couple of cable stations, and so the the political participation on the national stage of marginalized groups isn't like it is now. So
Right.
we turn to our corner store profits, or we turn to, not corner store, corner profits, the corner store, mind in a different place. But we turn to folks within our community for that kind of analysis. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how hip hop is intervening around what the devastation of Reagan and Reaganomics in the community.
Yeah, man, that's a big one. I mean, I guess one way that I could say there's an intervention was the you know, as the economy is changing, and as, you know, folks who were able to get jobs, working class jobs that afforded them a living, to, you know, enter into middle class lifestyle, and, you know, have job that gave them health care and benefits. As this period is kind of transitioning out, one of the things that hip hop, you also start to see, you know, schools are kind of going through these similar changes, and programs are being cut and things of that nature. So hip hop kind of stands into that void. I think hip hop stands in other ways. You know, if you look at some of the history of some of the street organizations in the early days of hip hop, and the roles that some of those organizations played in, you know, supporting people in the community and things of that nature, there's a long history of that. But most certainly, I think that hip hop begins to, in the music, it begins to articulate for young people that there are other alternatives. And as this music starts to make all this money, as you know, by the time you come into the 90s, even artists that were political were going platinum. And that was a different reality. I mean, as a college student, you know, as I entered college, there was no one who was thinking about college was imagining they could make a living rapping. But as I was exiting college, that reality had begun to shift. So I think hip hop played that role. But in terms of a political role, certainly people began to tune in a different kind of way. I think that young people knew there was a certain sense of being marginalized. They knew that there was a certain sense that the society wasn't working for them, and they didn't really. And if you were young and you were Black, you kind of felt like there was this kind of second class citizenship. Interestingly, I feel like the millennials, in the way in which they began to approach activism, have taken more ownership of their Americanness than I think than we ever did. So I think it's interesting that that has actually worked to their advantage in a way in which I never could have imagined it was possible.
Mm. Well, I mean, you're explaining an interesting tension, which is like hip hop is, there's a segment of hip hop that introduces a political consciousness
Right.
that makes
Right.
people
Right.
skeptical of
Yeah.
even interplaying with this government, or
Right.
even aligning, like you were talking about the kind of back to Africa sort of
Right.
aesthetics that you see so heavily in hip hop.
Hmm.
So to make this return back into the electoral realm is
Yeah.
it's kind of an interesting choreography.
Yeah, it is interesting. You know, I think that those of us who begin to get involved in I think that what it was once hip hop began to prove itself as an economic force, um, generationally we start to think about, well, how can we translate this into a political impact? You know, and I think that's what it was. It was people who were activist minded. And first it was people at the local level. There were local people who had used hip hop in electoral campaigns and been successful. So
Do you have any examples?
yes, absolutely. In Selma, there was I think his name was Joe Smitherman, I think it was his name. He was the mayor of Selma for, I think, going back decades. And young people, interesting, it's funny you bring this up. Latasha Brown, who's now one of the co-founders of Black Voters Matter,
Yeah.
she was a young activist with an organization called 21st Century Youth Leadership Movement. And they created a campaign that used hip hop. I believe MC Lyte and some other artists did public service announcements for them, and they were able to get him this guy out of office. So I think that's one example. There were other groups. There was a group called Listen Inc. I think they were out of Washington D.C. They had done work like that. Some of the early work that Van Jones did, before, you know, again, talk about a disconnect from somebody who did a lot of major early
Yeah.
work. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like Van's organization, the Ella Baker Center,
Yeah.
they were
Color
major.
of Change is one that he
Yeah,
launched.
exactly. But
Yeah.
even before Color of Change, they were leading student walkouts
Yeah.
around prisons and juvenile facilities and incarceration. They were doing cop watch, all this stuff they were doing. Like this is back like in the 90s.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean,
yeah.
I wanted to drill into the 90s, but I think you gave us such a great segue to like the disconnect, right? Okay, so in this moment, we have Van Jones speaking at the CPAC, the conservative political conservative conference that is like, I don't know, the Million Man March for conservatives. And then you have him saying that conservatives now are on the are doing more around criminal justice, and he really tried to form that relationship with Trump and Kushner, and then now you have Lil Wayne, who was pardoned by Trump and said he was voting for him. Yes. And then we have Ice Cube, Ice Cube, who, because he said he couldn't get a meeting with the Harrison, the Biden Harrison team, that like Trump was more responsive and cared more about Black people. So what do you make of this? Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you just mentioned those forces that like grew up in the hip hop generation, and ones that were so instrumental. I mean, Lil Wayne a little bit later, but Ice Cube, like for you to hear Ice Cube and to, you know, hear some of his earlier music, and then sampling of also Farrakhan. How did you make sense of?
Yeah, Ice Cube, that's a big one. That's a big one. I mean, I think that you know, first I want to go back to Van Jones for a second.
Yeah. Sorry, that's a big one.
Yeah. I don't know if Van ever said that conservatives were doing more.
He did at CPAC. He did at CPAC. Okay. Yeah, okay. He said you guys are actually doing more.
Okay, that's.
I don't know if he was pandering.
Yeah, he might have been pandering. He might have been pandering. I mean, I think that Van is a very complex individual. I think that, you know, I understand the urgency of people to critique him or anyone else, but I do think that some people have done a lot of work and have had a big impact. And we have to sometimes give them the benefit of the doubt, because if we box them too much in, we might limit their possibilities. I think that Van has done so much work, like you mentioned, Color of Change, and that was one of the organizations he co-founded. Green for All was another organization he co-founded. He was the green jobs person in the Obama White House before he was manipulated out of.
Glenn Beck had a
right.
campaign against him.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I understand if but I would just encourage people to really study the history of folks before you just kind of dismiss them. I feel like he's somebody who I feel has done a lot. He's done a lot out front. He's done a lot behind the scenes. He's had influence on many people who are able to do the work that they're able to do because of the things that he's been doing. So I try to just encourage people to really know the history of someone before you just kind of throw them under the bus. Ice Cube, I think the Ice Cube thing was interesting. He had put out this contract. What was he calling it? Contract with Black America or for Black America?
Yeah.
A kind of a takeoff of the Tavis Smiley book of a decade or a few decades earlier. I can't remember now. So I mean, but I think the interesting thing about Ice Cube was, I felt like a lot of what he was saying was kind of in a vacuum. Even P. Diddy, for that matter, and P. Diddy, when he said, "Oh,
Can
we
you
should
explain?
start a," yeah,
Can you explain what? Okay.
Yeah, I think that when P. Diddy said we should start a Black political party, like he said that as if this was an original idea. Like this,
and a couple weeks before the actual election.
Before the election, yeah. So I mean, it was just crazy. So I feel like Ice Cube, I feel similarly. He tried to kind of go this thing alone, really kind of partly out of frustration. I felt to me, he seemed really rattled by the police killings, and he was fed up. And I think that people didn't see that there was a time before he started talking about this contract in which he was very outspoken on Instagram about the police killings and how angry he was about this. So I think he kind of had this kind of sense of, I want to see something happen. I want to see something happen. Like, I've had this success as an actor and as an artist, and now I want to see how I can use my influence to do something, to change these dynamics in our lifetime, so our kids don't have to do have the same experience. I thought it was interesting that it was driven by that, but also I felt like he also was someone who I felt he thought he could take his individualistic, entrepreneurial, capitalistic endeavor approach and bring it over into the activist lane, rather than seeing the work that's already going on and how to partner and work with people that are doing work already. And I think, to me, that was the lapse, because I think a lot of the pitfalls he fell into, he could have avoided had he teamed up with other activists. And I know that there were some overtures to some folks, like I guess I don't know if I can say some of the folks, he did reach out to people.
But also, as you were mentioning,
right,
this disconnect around, there were already Black organizers who were in conversation with the Biden-Harris team, and just even Harris and Biden separately for years, right? It didn't just happen. And if they didn't contact him, that wasn't, or maybe shouldn't have been looked at as like a big rebuff to all Black Americans.
Yeah.
And I think that's the positioning that was hard for folks.
I think so. I mean, I think the other thing that's interesting there are a couple of things about this that I think we should kind of hit on a little bit. One was the sophistication with which the conservative movement got involved in this conversation, right? With these hip hop artists. I mean, on the one hand, they're kind of tapping into some of the, tension between black men and women around power, right? That's happening as we're in this black girl magic moment. You know what I mean? You got a black woman, are being positioned and advanced as VP candidates, et cetera. And so I feel like they were very effective at two things. One, tapping into Trump's relationship with historical relationship with hip hop and hip hop artists, and hip hop artists kind of celebrating him as a entrepreneurial, successful, economically successful or financially successful person, right? That they somehow admired, right? And then using that almost as a way of building a divide between Black men and Black women in terms of the voting. This was really fascinating to me because this was something we hadn't seen happen before in as long as hip hop has been involved in these electoral presidential election campaigns. So it was an interesting turn. And I think that people within hip hop responded to it very, very, very effectively. I think it's one of the lessons of 2020 that hasn't been talked about enough.
Well, this is, I mean, I want to go, I think, because there's a lot of components that you just mentioned, and there's a little bit more I'd love to engage. So one of Trump being the symbol in the 80s and the 90s, like he has 4 decades of being the symbol of wealth creation that you want to emulate because of the myth, the narrative around Trump, right? Like he's allegedly self-made. He is seen as this symbolic force, right? For hip hop, for all things, right? But especially in hip hop lyrics, in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, he made cameos. How much of that sort of that branding is being used, as you were saying, and kind of a holdover from those early days of hip hop? Because it's not like we saw Chance the Rapper or Kendrick Lamar or any of these younger folks really come to the side of Trump.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of it had to do with access, past relationships. You know what I mean? And I think most certainly, if we go back to Kanye, for example.
Oh yeah, Kanye.
And Kanye's kind of flirting with Trump even before he was elected, right? And then leading up into, visiting him in the White House and this kind of thing. I felt like with Kanye, some of that had to do with, kind of a competitiveness with Jay-Z. And if Jay-Z had this great relationship with Obama, who's also from Chicago, and he from Chicago, and he don't have no relationship with him, then well, maybe he'll have this relationship with Trump. It seemed like a very calculating thing. But, I feel like there were other folks who I felt they were, the capitalism really, which Trump personified, what I mean, was something that was also very much centered in as another ethic within hip hop.
Which is what you talk about. Politics. Yeah. Which is what you talk about was why, like, the Nation of Islam and then the hip hop values of that time period really mirrored that. I'm just quoting you: Black economic self-sufficiency and empowerment.
Right. But I think that with Trump is a little bit different. I mean, like, I feel like the Black economic empowerment and self-sufficiency, to me, is leaning more into a sense of Black self-determination. I feel like the capitalist ethic that Trump is proposing, which folks like Lil Wayne and Waka Flocka and others are latching, or 50 Cent are latching onto, saying things like, "Oh, it's gonna be better for me tax-wise if Trump is in office." That was something different. And I think that it backfired.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we
saw... not for Lil Wayne. He got pardoned.
Yeah, Lil Wayne did get pardoned. That's true. That's true. That's very true. Not for Lil Wayne. But I think that in terms of it being able to turn voters in some extreme way, or even marginally enough so that Trump could win, right? That he could siphon off enough Black votes. I don't think that it was successful. I think people saw through it. I think there were things that we as hip hop activists got involved with. I created an organization with Dave Mays, who was the founder of the Source magazine, called the Hip Hop Political Education Summit. We partnered up with Black Voters Matter and Jasiri's group, and Pastor Mike, Faith in Action, Jasiri's group, One Hood Media, and we put on a hip hop political education summit on Black men in the vote. And we were able to bring out hip hop artists like, oh my goodness, Talib Kweli was a part of it. Bun B was a part of it. Big Daddy Kane was one of the artists, and others. And we wanted people to talk about, as brothers in the community, what are, and put them in conversation with regular people, right?
Yeah.
And grassroots activists, to talk about what was happening in the community and what is the word of the men that they know in their lives as to what are the political issues that matter to them. And it was a really interesting and robust conversation that went so far away from anything that these politicians were talking about.
Yeah.
And it was a refreshing moment, and it was a moment that I think showed great possibility for political engagement in the future. So I think that idea that people were gonna, it was gonna create this kind of, internal warfare within the Black community. I think that at first people were kind of shocked, and it did have that effect, but I think that there was a sophisticated response to it. And I think the conversation remained at a high level.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And thank you for reminding us that there is movement on the other side. And I think it did get overblown by the press as if it was
really did.
As if it was
like the East Coast, like the East Coast West Coast war.
Yeah. I mean, the press kept on leading with this conversation of why are Black men voting for Trump?
Yes.
Versus a couple of percentage points that went up from
right.
2016 to now.
And the one of the things that Conrad Muhammad, was Conrad Muhammad in the 90s, Conrad Tillard, he pointed out in that conversation was, why are we fixating on the small percentage of Black men that aren't voting for the progressive candidates, when the majority of Black men, more than any other demographic other than Black women, are voting for the progressive candidate? So that was a point that got kind of hammered home.
Yeah, and then something else you said in your piece, which is that Black youth are voting at higher rates than their peers. So like this idea of like Black people should have came out to vote more for Hillary, and not even sizing up how many white people came out. There's so much to talk about with this. I do want folks to know that we are accepting questions in the chat. So just type them and then I'll read them to Bakari, and we can continue the conversation that way. So just feel free to send them with everyone. Doesn't have to be me privately. And if not, like I said, this conversation we could go on forever. I mean, like the fact the Trump team called their plan the Platinum Plan, and it was like literally 2 pages of like, it was like a flyer. It was not. It wasn't even a press release. And then the Lift Every Voices from Harris and Biden, and not that I'm like advocating Harris and Biden, was a very thorough, like 20 plus 30-page documents.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, I know, but I mean, like the fact, as you said, that conservatives, and I think this is the thing we're going to have to look out for, is the way that they so effectively manipulated the legitimate grievances that people should have around government, to say that they might be anti-establishment, or that they're not going to be like Biden with the 1994 crime bill, or that they're not going to be like DA. It's so, I mean, the world they live in is very interesting. Like trying to slam a Black woman DA at the same time saying Blue Lives Matter, but then killing cops at the Capitol. Like,
yes, that's all very, very interesting. One of the things I wanted to mention about this book, this 400 Souls.
Do you have it? Can you?
I do have it.
Can you? Yeah, it looks gorgeous. Yes.
Yeah, it does look gorgeous. It does look gorgeous. I was asked to be a part of it. I was excited to be a part of it. At first, I was like, this is interesting. Everyone got like a 5-year period. I think it's 90 writers. including poets, and everyone got like a 5-year period. And so I was thinking, man, how am I going to write this in this kind of thing in like a 5-year period? And so I started thinking about what happened in those years that was really, defining. And I thought about people like Tarana Burke, who started the Me Too movement, people like Yusef Salaam, who now known as the Exonerated Five, was the Central Park Five. People like, my goodness, the sister who runs Planned Parenthood. I can't think of what her name, Alexis McGill Johnson. And all of these folks, Van Jones, were hip hop heads. Raz Baraka, who's now the mayor of Newark. All these folks were hip hop heads and activists that I've known for over 20 years, doing amazing work, in hip hop. And really, they had a similar experience, or if you would ask them, which is how I knew this, they had a story about how hip hop intervened on them and Latasha Brown uses gave me the language of hip hop gave us agency, as a political, as a way to think about politics, as a way of being politically engaged that was distinctive from the Black Power movement. Even though we recognize the lessons of the Civil Rights and Black Power movement as useful, hip hop gave us another way in which to be present and to enter as in our whole selves. And so with the book, that's what I was, wanting to kind of in the essay, I wanted to communicate that, and I hope that that people got it, because one of the things I felt was a lot of what is happening in terms of the articulation of Black Lives Matter is kind of like, I feel, ignoring a lot of that history. It's like a 30-year period of a lot of amazing activists focused on a lot of important issues that are still coming to the fore and being rethought and tackled now. And I think it's a lot of lessons in those years. And I wanted to kind of point to that in the essay, as other folks throughout the book were, talking about this kind of broad history. And I thought it was smart. They called it a community history, because that's really, that's like really what it is. And to have so many voices in this conversation about what are the things that resonate as you think about the history of Black America, which is a powerful thing and a special thing.
So we have some questions about basically the last presidential election. Going back to the conference, the Hip Hop Education Summit that you hosted. There's a question about how it was different than the ways that the politicians were talking about, I'm assuming, Black electoral politics and what mattered to Black folk.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, for one thing, it was the people that we had in the room that are sometimes not invited into conversations like this. We were very broad. We had people that, Talib has had some, conflicts with people on social media lately and has been ostracized some. So we didn't, we felt like Talib has done a lot for the community over the years and has done a lot with women and for women, and has been a voice for women, and we didn't want to ostracize him. We wanted to bring him into this conversation because we thought he had something valuable to add. Professor Griff, someone who also has been, kind of ostracized over the years, he was present and made great contributions. Grassroots activists in cities like, Chicago. There was a brother, J.R. Fleming, who runs an organization that focuses on housing as a human right. Just grassroots brothers. T.C. Muhammad, who works with the Poor People's Campaign and also with Reverend Yearwood's Hip Hop Caucus. He came through and had a lot of important things to say. So we tried to just get as many broad voices as possible. Mondale Robinson, who runs an organization that works with Black male voters specifically. So just try to keep it as broad as possible, and to bring as many voices in the room as possible, and to not care about how popular people were. That was something that made it different. We were more focused on people who had reach in grassroots communities. There were brothers who worked with a nonviolent, anti-violence organization in Milwaukee. Kwabena Nixon was one of the brothers, and others. Muhib Dyer. So the grassroots brothers came through talking about the conversations that are happening in their neighborhoods. And unfortunately, in terms of these electoral politics, I don't hear those voices, and I certainly don't hear them talking about what are the issues facing Black men.
Yeah. I think you and I have been in the game long enough to see parachuting a celebrity or high profile artist last couple of weeks of a campaign is not really consequential. Like you said, I think having folks who come from communities and organized communities, and our artists as well, has a lot more of a stake around political participation and power and agency, as you mentioned. I want to get to this conversation you had on an edited volume that you're a part of. You co-edited Democracy Unchained. I want to make sure to get to it. It came out last March. There was a great conversation that you had. It made me think about a conversation I imagine is going to be a big one, and it's percolated already, but the one around reparations. You mentioned Talib, and I thought about like the ADOS community and his riff with them.
Yeah, that's right.
But that there is a championing, and then we can get to now the questions are proliferating.
Okay.
But I think that the conversation you had with folks, if you guys want to check it out, it's State of America Project.
State of American Democracy.
Let's see. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There was a conversation you all had about how deep the tentacles of American financial capital power are in institutions that financed, insured policy through enslavement, basically. Right. I just was curious if you, and especially we heard Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is also from the hip hop generation, deliver his, like within a couple of minutes, under a 10-minute time frame, the points around his case for reparations piece in the Atlantic to the Congress. I don't know if you had any thoughts about where this conversation's going with this new administration.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I do know one of the folks that we had in that conversation was Dr. Ron Daniels. And Dr. Ron Daniels has an organization called the African American Reparations Commission, I think they're called. And they are focusing on, keeping that conversation going. There are a lot of grassroots communities and local efforts that are trying to advance bills locally. They're in conversation with a lot of those folks around how to best, how to, what constitutes reparations and what doesn't. And so I think that's an important conversation. The woman who you're talking about is Deirdre Farmer Paleman. She started an organization called the Restitution Study Group. She worked with a group of attorneys. I want to say it was at least 10 years ago. It was before Ta-Nehisi Coates' essay on reparations. And they went back and they dug through this history and found these corporations that were, offshoots of previous corporations, going all the way back to insurance companies that were insuring a slave trade in vehicle, cargo, as well as the ships. She talks about this in great detail. And there have been countless articles written on this stuff. Unfortunately, a lot of attention hasn't been paid to it. Even in the Ta-Nehisi Coates essay, he doesn't mention it. But in my opinion,
he just starts with that and kind of drops it off with the Lehman Brothers.
Okay. But in my opinion, I think that there are, when you start to think about activism, I think one of the things that would be powerful for us to think about is to always begin with the furthest we've gotten, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like, to me, that's the starting point for a serious conversation about reparations, is that work that Deirdre Farmer Paleman was able to do. I think that this bill and what's happening with Ron Daniels and the work that they're doing is gonna help keep this stuff alive, because they're in a conversation that's very rich and bringing in a lot of different people. And then, of course, Sandy Darity's work,
Yes.
who was once a skeptic of reparations.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
That's right.
He's an economist at
That's
Duke.
right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So he's gotten involved, and I think his book has helped to bring a lot of attention as well.
Can we do some questions rapid
Yeah.
fire though?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know we're
Okay.
heading towards the end, and I think that
Right.
they're
Right.
great
Okay.
and deserve a response.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about how Tupac's music influenced political culture?
Oh my goodness, Tupac.
Rapid fire.
For Tupac, I would say a couple of things. One, look at who influenced Tupac. I think that's important. I think Geronimo Pratt was one of his influences. Sundiata Acoli was one of his influences, and others. But there was an article that I edited on Tupac when I was at the Source that I think is worthy of reading. Again, this was after Tupac was killed. I had asked his mom, Afeni, if she would do an interview with us. She told us no. She said that she felt that the magazines had helped her son to be killed.
Oh, wow.
But I said, well, so I said, well, I'm going to leave this alone. And then I thought, I'm friends with Sonia Sanchez. I know her and Sonia Sanchez are friends. So I mentioned it to Sonia. Say, hey, Sonia, do you think you could get Afeni to do this interview? She's like, I'll ask her. She's like, she'll do it, but she wants to have the conversation with me. One of the best interviews that I've ever edited. This conversation between Sonia Sanchez and Afeni, and they go into a lot of great detail, things that other people have never talked about. One of the things she talks about is how Tupac, as a child, the FBI would come to his school and question him on the playground.
Wow.
So
wow.
Check that out if you can. If you should be able to find it. It's just kind of find Source magazine, Sonia Sanchez and Afeni Shakur.
I'm gonna have to read that one. Could you speak about the influence of Gil Scott-Heron on the evolution of hip hop politics and how he was viewed by later generations?
Wow, man, these are good.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm like, can we do a time check? Is it okay?
Yeah. No, I think that they said we could go a little over if we're feeling it.
Okay.
So Gil Scott-Heron was someone I edited Gil Scott-Heron at one point. I don't know if I ever told you that. Yeah,
no, you did not.
Yeah, when I worked
such a big fan of his.
When I worked at Third World Press, we published a book by Gil Scott-Heron called So Far So Good. And Gil Scott-Heron, just an amazing man. His influence on hip hop is profound for people who are political. The political artists knew who Gil Scott-Heron was, and they sought him out like right up to the end. I mean, he was always well loved and respected. He has the one album he did called Spirits, and on that album he has a song called Message to the Messengers, where he's talking to hip hop artists about some of the things that's happening in the music that he feels needs to be corrected. Some artists, I think, listen to that, and I think it has had an impact. But yeah, I feel like his impact is profound. I think one of the things that makes him very interesting is he started out as a novelist. A lot of people don't know that.
I did not know that at all. Wow.
He wrote several novels. Another interesting tidbit about Gil Scott-Heron, him and Joan Morgan at one point, I think they had attended the same school growing up, not at the same time, but the same school that Gil Scott-Heron went to, Joan Morgan went to as well. So they're both alum of the same school. So that's another little tidbit. But Gil Scott-Heron, just amazing. He was a great supporter of political prisoners. He was against the death penalty. One time that I met Gil was in Houston. He was performing for Gary Graham. Gary Graham was on death row. He came down. He did the concert just as for free. A benefit concert. Just a wonderful human being. Read his book. Oh my goodness, I'm trying to think what the book is called. The Last Holiday, which is a book about a year he spent traveling with Stevie Wonder, fighting and raising awareness around the importance of the Dr. King holiday. Great book. They performed, I can't remember how many cities, but all over the country. And so it's a memoir about his life, but it's told through the lens of this tour with Stevie Wonder. So Check
Thank you
that
for
out.
that. Oh my God, we have a whole reading list.
Yeah.
I think these are interesting questions.
Oh, we had the library.
I know. These are interesting questions because you do see Tupac and Gil Scott Heron get revived on social media by this Gen Z community that's experiencing them for the first time. I know that in the poetry spoken word scene, Gil Scott Heron is a god, right?
Yeah.
Especially Winter in America is being revived now. Can you, this is a great one too. Can you speak more to the future of hip hop and how it will address this evolving power dichotomy between men and women?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You know, it's funny when people ask me these future hip hop questions. One of the things I think about is I feel like we have the aesthetics of hip hop now. But I don't know if it's still, I don't know if I want to almost make an argument that is it still hip hop? I feel like we have a new musical form that's still kind of being fitted into this box because of a music industry, right? That can't really, you know, to have to think through a new McDonald's or a new Walmart is too hard, right? But you already got this canister that you can fit it into, right? So I feel like we're dealing with a lot of the aesthetics of hip hop. And I feel like a lot of the substantive things about hip hop that made hip hop what it was and made it grow are more in the background. So I don't know what the future is. One of the things that I would say when I think about the future, I think about the past. And so one of the things that I try to do in this 400 Souls essay was to tell a story about how this music, you know, impacted a generation, right, through the lens of this 5-year period. And at the end of it, you have these individuals who end up doing these amazing things, but in part because hip hop gave them agency. Yeah. So when I think about the future, you know, I think that we should be thinking about, you know, music that is inspirational. You know, Emory Douglas has this list of who was the Minister of Culture.
Culture, yeah.
For the Black Panthers, he has this list of 12 things that an artist should do, right? Or 12, I can't remember what he calls it, but it's these 12 points, right? That if you're doing art, I wish I could find it. I can't.
I'm looking it up right now so I can help you out. So you can keep on going.
If you're an artist, these are 12 almost like rules you should live by, and they're absolutely brilliant. I would love to put those things in front of every artist out here performing. And I'll add to that, Amiri Baraka, the poet, he used to say that the job of the artist is to be a never-ending bullet in the brain of the enemy. So there's that.
Wow. Well, I mean, taking it, okay, so 2 more questions. So and then we can come to a close. But related to that, maybe you already answered it in this last point, but what metrics should hip hop use to evaluate our political effectiveness, impact?
Yeah, what metric? And to measure our impact, man. I mean, I think that you know, one of the interesting things about writing the book with Rakim was he talked a lot about what the book is called Sweat the Technique, Revelations on Creativity from the Lyrical Genius. He talks about what kind of artist he wanted to be and why it was important, and why it was important that he had this kind of a way in which it was very important to him how he presented himself to young people. It was very important to him to learn from other artists. And so he goes through these different things that were important to him, but it was also important to him to be a voice that was uplifting and that was going to make people wiser than they were before they came in contact with him. And so these things became important to him, and a lot of that he drew on his religious experience with Islam was very important to him, and he talks about this in the text. and it was important in the way he started to study. Study was very important to him. So I think that these are some of the, when you look at the people who are the best at this, whether you're talking about Rakim, or whether you're talking about Black Thought, or whether you're talking about Rhapsody, you know, all of them will talk about the things, the way that they study and the things that influence them, right? And trying to be at the height of the game. And I feel like the other thing that Rakim talks about in this book is and we did some events together. We did the Kennedy Center together. We were at the Andy Warhol Museum together, and people would ask him, what is it, you know, how can I be a great artist? And he would say, it depends on what kind of artist you want to be. Do you want to make money? Do you just want to make money? Or do you want to influence positively a generation? It's a great, I mean, I think that's the answer. The answer is in the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And of course, read that book. You have more on your reading list. Last question. In your opinion, who's the most underrated hip hop artist that everyone should be listening to? I think I know your answer.
Oh my goodness. The most underrated hip hop artist. Oh my God. I don't even know who I would say. The most underrated.
Who everybody should be listening.
Underrated, and if you underrated, everybody should be listening to you. I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer for that. Underrated.
Or somebody that we might not be listening to that needs a larger platform.
Yeah. It's so many. It's so many. I'm trying to think of. I'm thinking of the lyrics in my head. Man, it's too many people that I feel aren't listened to enough. Right now, one of the artists that I'm listening to that I'm really excited about is Kimba from the Bronx. He's a young.
I don't know about Kimba.
Yeah. He's a young. He did an album. It's called 8 minutes and is it 44 seconds? Is that was the time that the officer
46.
46. That's the name of the album.
Yeah.
The name of the album is 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Amazing young artist. I don't think he's more than 22. At one point, a couple of years ago, Kendrick was doing a performance in New York and brought him up on stage with him. So the artists that are doing major work, like winning Pulitzer Prizes, know who he is. So we had him on our program for the Black Men in the Vote. He did a performance for us. Just an amazing young man, very thoughtful with the music. We also had Rakim perform, and we kind of orchestrated a meeting between the two of them. He was so excited to meet Rakim, so that was a part of the deal also. I feel like Rebel Diaz isn't listened to enough. I think that
they're from New York too. Right?
They're from Chicago originally.
Oh, they are Chicago. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. But some of the things that, I mean, because the thing is, there's so much more than artists. And I think these are the people that I'm excited about. I'm excited about the activist-minded folks who are also artists. So like Invincible.
Oh my God.
Yes. Amazing.
The complex movement from Detroit.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I think
she's underrated. She's underrated.
They.
Well, I'm saying Invincible, her as an artist. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Underrated, right? And so yes, I think the Invincible. I would say Jasiri's work. Jasiri
I thought you were going to say Jasiri. Yeah.
Yes, of course I'm going to say Jasiri.
That was my first thought. Okay, so we have a request for more female voices. You said Rhapsody, which is a great one.
Yeah, Akua Naru, another great artist she's performed around the world, is known all over the world more than she is here.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing. And she's the one who I mentioned earlier with the Keepers Project.
Yes, you did.
Cyrock, also extreme. Okay, now we're getting into the really underrated, amazing people. Cyrock, if you haven't heard Cyrock,
all we had to do was say women. That's we would know did not get their flowers. Yeah, already.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, her rapping is so amazing. There's actually a song with Cyrock and Akuanaru both on the same song. That's also amazing. But yeah, these are all amazing artists who have made great contributions, but they don't fit necessarily into the mainstream kind of corporate model. And so yeah, they absolutely, if you want to listen to some really good music, another brother out of DC, Asheru.
Oh, I don't know
Asheru,
Asheru.
yeah, Asheru was also a high school teacher. He's a principal now, I think. Asheru, if you ever saw and everybody's seen the Boondocks.
Yes,
The
yes,
theme
yes.
song for the Boondocks is Asheru. And
Wow.
Aaron,
Okay.
yeah, that's right. Aaron Magruder wanted this song from Asheru. And so Asheru put this song down for him. I mean, you know the song. Everybody knows it, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
some might not. You know these younger folks.
Asheru has a song with Talib that's also bananas. Talib has him on a track. That's pretty crazy. And it's a John Coltrane sample.
So you got a mood swing.
Mood swing. That's right.
Yeah,
Hey, who knows
blue
this?
black. This is blue black.
All
So
right.
you got a lot of enthusiasm. So
Yes.
maybe we'll have to do a lot more of a deep dive into some of the music you should be listening to now that does have those values, those aesthetics,
Yes.
those political commitments of
Right.
the rise of the hip hop generation. So
All right.
yeah. I want to thank you, Bakari. Everybody get 400 souls, 400 souls.
Yes.
A history of African America, 1619 through 2019. Democracy Unchained as well. Do you want to plug anything else?
I think Jasiri's album, what is the last album called? Revolutionary.
Look, I was
Right.
trying to get you to plug your things.
No, Black Liberation Theology. And of course, your amazing TV show that you're writing on, Rami. Please, absolutely, it's on Hulu. Check that out. It's amazing. And I was, I've been keeping up with this woman for forever since her first book, Demanding Dignity, which is also a must read. But I had no idea you were writing for television till like last week. When you mentioned it to me kind of on the side, oh yeah, by the way, have you seen Rami? I'm like, nah. And I was dissing TV shows, and you're like, well, I hope you don't feel that way about Rami.
I think this is the first time I've ever thrown to somebody to plug their work, and they exclusively plugged other people's work.
Hey, a lot of good stuff out here.
This is so Bakari for folks. Bakari loves to put people on. He loves to support really, I don't want to say amazing work, but yes, amazing work, because I'm a part of what he was saying that would show very little humbleness on my account. But I appreciate being in conversation with you.
I appreciate you doing it for me. Yeah, I appreciate it. Kathy Cohen, Democracy Remix, another must read.
Absolutely. We're gonna have to come up with a book list for the library. It should be Bakari Kitwana's recommendations.